And Kevin Rudd got everybody's attention this week with his interview on Q&A when he talked about, I think in particular, when he said that there were some folk, some cabinet ministers, who wanted to abandon an ETS forever. This is how he justified it on the Australian Network's Newsline program.
Well, the bottom line is this. You've got to ask yourself a question in terms of the Prime Ministership of Mr Howard, the Prime Ministership of Mr Hawke, and the period of which I've been Prime Minister. You're going to ask questions about your record and what you've achieved or what you may have failed to achieve. And it's important that, as appropriate, that persons in those positions answer those questions in the context of setting the record straight.
As appropriate. I mean, I don't think we have seen John Howard revealing who was for a position, who was anti a position very much in the Howard cabinet where there were obvious disagreements. We knew there was a disagreement. That's already been written out. That's not disputed. For Kevin Rudd to confirm that is no big deal. For him to say he's sorry about it is no big deal. He could see why he'd want to do that for his own legacy. To go on and then emphasise it and say there were a number of folk who wanted to kill it off, I think is going beyond the bounds of what a leader should be able to do.
And isn't there a consistency problem now? Because Kevin Rudd can, and he says, I'll do and say what I think is necessary, but that doesn't apply for other ministers.
Well, all cabinet ministers talk about what happened in cabinet, but usually we call it a leak.
Yes.
They don't go on national television and say what happened, but they all blab, or most of them blab afterwards about what happened and who was up who. And
as some did when they said that Kevin Rudd left the room and slammed the door.
Who was for and against.
As someone leaked in the election campaign when it was revealed that Julia Gillard might have argued against a pension increase for a while there. I mean, this is the point. How damaging was that for Julia Gillard? If the inner workings of Cabinet and the argy-bargy in Cabinet are going to be revealed for all to see by whoever,
and
then surely it's going to undermine the cabinet process.
At the time, she addressed it during the election campaign. She didn't say, "I'm not going to talk about what happened in cabinet." She said, "Well, this is what I do in cabinet."
So, what do we think? Everything in cabinet should be open for all to see. Is that what we think?
Oh, we should have cabinet in public, as Lindsay Tanner said.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea.
I mean,
we won't get any forthright argument in cabinet. I think it's ridiculous.
No, cabinet does need to be confidential. I mean, it is an important part of our democratic institutions. But Kevin Rudd has been given a leave pass by his Prime Minister and by his ministerial colleagues to talk about what goes on in cabinet what went on in cabinet.
Why?
Because they can't stop him.
That's it.
Because they think that they're afraid of him. They fear him. But we don't know what the limits of that leave pass are, and there has to be a limit.
But
and how they will be imposed.
And at some point
isn't there also an issue?
At some point that limit's going to be reached.
Yep.
But isn't there also another reason for this, is that it just hands Tony Abbott an easy issue about a split in cabinet?
Well, number one, it hands Tony Abbott a very easy issue. He can fill in his new media appearances for the day, saying that the cabinet is split, that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister are at each other's throats. And as we saw in Queensland this week, for 2 days, Julia Gillard, on the 7:30 report with Madonna King, sort of wherever she went, the issue wasn't about what she was doing in Queensland, which was up there giving out more money for flood relief and for flood victims and going and visiting the people who were hit by the floods in January. None of that hardly got raised. It was all about Kevin. He completely derailed the government putting its agenda to the public for 48 hours. And a lot of ministers think that's totally unacceptable.
So what
is she going to do about it, though? If she wasn't so vulnerable, she'd probably be able to act against him. But the fact that she is so vulnerable means that he just goes on and does what he wants.
But I'm interested in the vulnerability. Is the vulnerability that if Kevin Rudd really gets angry and annoyed, he knows he can do the ultimate pull the band-aid off, quit the parliament, force a by-election.
That's not going to happen.
Well,
that's not
so what are they worried about, that he's going to just start
I think they're more
worried
about handing... Look, already Tony Abbott has an issue, but it's kind of... It's a bit woolly. But if she was to respond directly to Kevin Rudd, then he's got an easy issue. It's about
disunity.
Disunity, which is the worst issue to deal with in politics.
But there is a growing mood in the government at very senior levels that something has to be done, that this issue has to be confronted some way. I don't think they're quite sure exactly how. I think a few people have got an idea, and one senior minister said to me during the week, look, it's not going to be pretty, but we're going to have to do it, and we're going to have to do it fairly soon. Now, I think if Kevin Rudd pushes the boundary, I think Julia Gillard will. And she has to. She has to tell him that you're either going to play by my rules or it's the back bench.
But doesn't Kevin Rudd have to be careful too about the line he crosses? Because if he is trying to restore his credibility and perhaps position himself at some point for a comeback at some point, and I'm not thinking anytime soon, then he wants to make sure he doesn't really totally annoy everyone in his caucus who just sees him as a disloyal, backstabbing brat.
Well, that's where I think he went overboard on Q&A on Monday night. He went out there with a meat axe when he probably should have used a scalpel. He could have said, yes, I made a mistake, it was a huge mistake, I paid a big price, but I was the one who made the decision. He didn't then have to go on and say, they made me do it. And I think that would have played a whole lot better with his colleagues. It would have won him a bit more, support within the caucus and also in the wider community.
He knows where the vulnerabilities are. Well, he or somebody close to him who leaked during the last election campaign knew the family values thing. And this time, this is the one key issue that's going to determine the next election, and he just made Julia Gillard's ability to sell the policy that much harder.
Well,
he knows where the vulnerabilities are.
Climate change or carbon tax, price on carbon, and Julia Gillard's, what does she stand for? Two key
and
issues.
can she be trusted?
Well, Alexander Downer, the former Foreign Minister, said that the difference in this case and why it's so difficult when you replace a leader is because in this case it was the Prime Minister and not an opposition leader. Here he is.
It's one thing to wipe out an opposition leader. I've done that, and I've been wiped out as well. But it's a different thing to wipe out a Prime Minister. And if you do, don't forget that there will be long-term consequences as a result of that decision. The relationship between the now Prime Minister and Kevin Rudd it can't ever be functional. It wouldn't be human for it to become a functional and palsy-wowsy sort of relationship.
And it was never palsy-walsy between Paul Keating and Bob Hawke either, but Hawke had been there 10 years when he was replaced. So
and then Hawke left the Parliament. I mean, it's kind
Eventually,
of like the Michael Clarke Ricky Ponting kind of notion,
but they
isn't
still
it?
never get over it.
Yeah,
never get over it. It's not something they ever get over.
No, they still snipe.